The January sun beat down on the pier at the Miami Beach Marina, reflecting off the waters of Biscayne Bay like 1,000 liquid diamonds. Robert Caldwell adjusted his imported sunglasses and checked the Swiss watch on his wrist for the third time in 5 minutes. 42 years old, with perfectly coiffed graying hair and an impeccable Italian suit, even under the sweltering Florida heat. Every step he took toward his yacht resonated with the confidence of a man who had transformed a small construction company, inherited from his father, into a real estate empire that dominated the market in the American Southeast. The Majesty, his 50-foot yacht, rocked gently, moored at the exclusive pier. There, in just a few hours, Robert would close the most important deal of his career, a merger with the construction firm of his partners, Michael Brandon and Paul Fisher, which would multiply his net worth and solidify his name as one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. 20 years of partnership would culminate in this glorious moment. He smiled, imagining the headlines in the business journals the next day. Robert barely noticed the activity around him. Tourists snapped photos of the downtown. Miami skyline in the background, vendors offered cold drinks and sailors prepped their vessels. To him it was all just scenery, background noise on his trajectory of success. His mind was already on the meeting, on the numbers, on the contract clauses he had memorized the night before. That's when he felt a tug on the sleeve of his suit jacket. Robert spun around, ready to scold whoever had dared to touch him. His eyes met a little girl, about 8 years old, too thin for her age, with tangled brown hair pulled back in a crooked ponytail. Her clothes were a patchwork quilt, literally, a faded pink t-shirt with poorly sewn patches and a pair of denim shorts clearly inherited from someone bigger. Her dirty feet were clad in worn-out flip-flops. But what caught Robert's attention most were the child's eyes, brown and intense, burning with an urgency that contrasted with her fragile appearance. "Mister, you can't get on that boat," she said, her voice firm despite her quickened breath. Robert sighed, irritated. "Look, kid, I don't have any cash on me right now. Go ask for help at the church around the corner," he replied, gesturing vaguely toward the street and trying to pull away. "I don't want your money," she insisted, gripping the fabric of his jacket even tighter. "You're in danger. I heard everything last night." Robert's patience evaporated. "Let go of my jacket. Now. I'm late for a very important meeting, and I don't have time for games." "It's not a game," the girl raised her voice, drawing curious glances from people nearby. "Your friends are going to do something bad to you on the boat. I heard them talking yesterday when I was trying to sleep over there." She pointed to a dark corner between 2 shipping containers near an abandoned warehouse. Robert felt a pang of embarrassment as he realized a few people had stopped to watch the scene. The last thing he needed was a scandal involving a homeless child on the most important day of his professional life. He knelt, bringing himself to the girl's level, and lowered his voice. "Look, what's your name?" "Isabella. But everyone calls me Izzy." "Izzy, I understand you need help, but making up stories isn't the right way to get it. My partners have been my friends for 20 years. They're respectable family men. Now let me go and find a shelter or—" "They're not your friends," Isabella interrupted, her voice now quieter but even more intense. The heavier one, with the mustache, was sweating a lot. He talked about debts, said it was the only way out. The other one, the skinny one with glasses, agreed with everything. And there are other people involved, men I'd never seen before. One of them has a big scar on his left cheek, right here. She traced a line on her own face, from her eye to her chin. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. Michael was in fact heavier and had a mustache. Paul was thin and wore glasses, but that could just be a coincidence. Anyone who knew them could describe their physical features. Still, something in the girl's conviction unsettled him. "How do you know they're my partners?" he asked, testing her. "Because they said your name, Robert Caldwell. They said you're too trusting, that you never suspect a thing, that it would be easy because you think everyone's your friend when they have a stake in your business." Isabella recited the words as if she had memorized them. "And they said that, after you signed some important papers, they were going to make it look like an accident, that the boat would come back without you." Robert's heart hammered in his chest. This was too specific to be the invention of an 8-year-old. Accident. The word echoed in his mind. He stood up abruptly, looking at the Majesty with new eyes. Suddenly, the yacht that symbolized his success seemed like a floating trap. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, still skeptical but now genuinely curious. "Because I need help and you look like someone important, someone who can solve problems," Isabella answered with disarming honesty. "And because, even though you're a rich man who doesn't even look at people like me, you don't deserve to have this done to you. Nobody does. And what kind of help do you want in exchange for this information?" Robert crossed his arms, reverting to his pragmatic businessman mode. "My sister. They separated me from her 3 months ago. Her name is Claire, she's 5. The social workers took her to one place and me to another. They said they'd put us in foster homes until they found someone who wanted to take both care of us. But nobody ever wants 2 kids together," Isabella explained, and for the first time her voice trembled. "I ran away from the group home to try and find her, but it's impossible. I don't know where she is. If you're as rich and powerful as you seem, maybe you can find out where my sister is." Robert studied the girl's face. There was something about her, a mix of desperation and determination, that touched him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. When had he stopped seeing people as people and started seeing them only as pieces in his business game? When was the last time he had truly paid attention to someone who couldn't offer him some corporate benefit? "All right," he said finally. "Here's what we'll do. If what you're saying is true, if there really is something wrong happening on my yacht, I promise I will use all of my resources to find your sister. But if it's a lie, if you're making all this up—" "I'm not making it up," Isabella assured him, her eyes shining with cautious hope. "I swear on everything that's holy, on my sister, who's the only thing I have in this world." Robert pulled out his phone and dialed. A deep, professional voice answered. "Carter, it's me. I need you at the Miami Beach Marina now. Bring the binoculars and the long-range camera. Yes, it's urgent. 5 minutes." He hung up and turned his attention back to Isabella. "My head of security is going to check out your story. If there's anything suspicious on the boat, he'll spot it." Isabella nodded vigorously. "You'll see I'm telling the truth. The man with the scar was wearing a black sleeveless shirt. He has a snake tattoo on his right arm. And the guy with the mustache had a brown leather briefcase. He kept clutching it to his chest, all nervous." Robert mentally noted every detail. If the girl was lying, the details wouldn't match. But if she was telling the truth, he didn't even want to think about the implications. 20 years of partnership, 20 years of trust, all based on a lie. Impossible. Michael and Paul were practically family. They had built this empire together, weathered crises, celebrated victories. While they waited, Robert watched Isabella. She kept looking around like a cornered animal, ready to bolt at the slightest sign of danger. How many years had she spent on the streets? How had she ended up in this situation? He found himself wondering if she had eaten anything that day, if she had a place to sleep at night, if she was sick. Thoughts that normally never occupied his mind, which was usually filled with spreadsheets and contracts. A black SUV pulled up near the pier, and a tall man with broad shoulders and a military-style haircut got out. Leo Carter had been a captain in the army before becoming Robert's head of personal security 5 years ago. Discreet, efficient, and absolutely loyal. "Mr. Caldwell," Carter greeted him formally. "What's going on?" "This girl claims to have overheard a suspicious conversation involving my partners and my yacht. I need you to do a discreet visual check of the vessel. Look for people who shouldn't be there, especially a man with a facial scar and a snake tattoo on his arm," Robert instructed, keeping his tone professional despite the growing tension. Carter glanced at Isabella with curiosity, but asked no questions. He grabbed the equipment from the car and positioned himself strategically behind a stack of shipping containers, where he had a clear view of the Majesty without being seen. The minutes dragged on like hours. Robert tried to appear calm, but his hands were sweating inside his pants pockets. Isabella stood beside him, biting her lower lip, her eyes fixed on the boat, as if she could see through its walls. Finally, Carter returned, his usually expressionless face tense. "Sir, we need to talk in private," he said quietly, casting a significant look at Isabella. You can speak in front of her. She's the one who warned me, Robert replied, feeling his heart race. There are 4 men on the yacht besides the regular crew. 2 are hiding in the lower cargo hold. I was able to identify one of them when he opened the hatch for air. He matches the girl's description exactly, facial scar and snake tattoo. They're armed, sir. I clearly saw the holster of a gun when the guy moved. Robert's world seemed to tilt. Isabella was right. Completely right. His partners, his friends of 2 decades, had planned something terrible. The word the girl had used echoed in his mind again. Accident. Robert felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the hood of Carter's SUV, trying to process the information. 20 years. 20 years of partnership, of businesses built side by side, of family dinners, of shared confidences. And it was all a sham, culminating in this moment of absolute betrayal. We need to call the police immediately, Carter said urgently, already reaching for his phone. Wait, Robert held up a hand, his mind working at top speed despite the shock. If we call the police now and surround the boat, they might take hostages or try to escape. And I need to understand why. I need to hear from Michael and Paul why they're doing this. Sir, with all due respect, your safety is more important than any explanation, Carter argued. I know, but think about it. They're expecting me to board unsuspecting, right? If I just don't show up, they'll get suspicious and could disappear before we have concrete proof of their intentions. We need to be absolutely sure before we destroy the reputations of 2 respected businessmen. Isabella, who had remained silent, observing the conversation between the 2 men, finally spoke. You're going to get on that boat? After everything I told you? She sounded genuinely worried. Robert looked at the girl, at this child, who had just saved his life with a simple warning. A strange sense of responsibility washed over him. I can't let them get away with it, Izzy, but I promise I'll be careful. Carter, call for discreet backup. I want our security team positioned around the marina. And call the FBI, but tell them to remain on standby at a safe distance. When I give the signal, you move in. And what's the signal? Carter asked, clearly uncomfortable with the plan. I'll leave my phone on an open call in my pocket. You'll hear everything. When the situation becomes untenable, you come in. But I need clear confessions, audio evidence. I need to understand what went wrong. Carter hesitated, but he knew Robert well enough to know that once a decision was made, there was no dissuading him. All right. But at the first sign of real danger, we're coming in with or without your consent, sir. Deal, Robert agreed. Now, Izzy, you're coming with me. You'll wait here in the car with the tinted windows. If anything goes wrong, Carter will take you to a safe place. And when this is all over, we're going to find your sister. That's a promise. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, which she quickly wiped away with the back of her dirty hand. You're really going to help me? I am. You saved my life today, Izzy. That creates a bond I intend to honor, Robert replied, surprised by the sincerity of his own words. He, who had never deeply cared for anyone but himself, felt a genuine connection to this brave little girl. 20 minutes later, with the entire operation set up and the team in position, Robert walked toward the Majesty. His heart was pounding, but he maintained the calm, confident expression he had perfected over decades in business. In his pocket, his phone was recording and transmitting every sound to the security team and the waiting FBI agents. As he approached the yacht, Robert saw Michael Brandon on the bow, waving enthusiastically. The heavier man, indeed, with a well-trimmed mustache, was smiling broadly. He wore a white polo shirt and beige shorts, the perfect picture of a businessman on a day off. But Robert now noticed what he hadn't before. The excessive sweat on Michael's forehead, the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the brown leather briefcase, exactly as Isabella had described. Robert! Finally! Paul's already in the conference room getting the contracts organized. Come on, today's the day we make history, Michael exclaimed, extending a hand to help Robert aboard. A historic day indeed, Robert replied, taking his hand and stepping onto the deck. The yacht swayed gently under his feet, and he had to grab the railing to keep his balance. Or maybe it was his legs that were shaking. The vessel was luxurious, as one would expect from a yacht of its size. Varnished wood deck, gleaming stainless steel finishes, impeccable white leather upholstery. Robert had invested a fortune in this boat, turning it into a floating office for important meetings and, occasionally, a refuge to escape the stress of the city. Now every familiar corner seemed menacing. Paul Fisher emerged from the main cabin, tall and thin, his fine-rimmed glasses reflecting the sunlight. He was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Robert, my friend, ready for the big moment?" "More than ready," Robert forced enthusiasm into his voice. 20 years working for this day, right?" "Exactly," Paul agreed, but there was something false in his tone, something that Robert, now on high, alert, perceived clearly. 20 years of partnership culminating in this perfect moment. Too perfect, maybe, Robert thought, but he kept smiling. The three of them headed to the yacht's conference room, an elegant space with a mahogany table and leather chairs. On the table were stacks of perfectly organized documents, gold pens, crystal glasses, and a bottle of French champagne on ice. "I thought we'd have a toast before we sign," Michael said, picking up the bottle. "After all, it's not every day we triple our net worth, is it?" Robert sat at the head of the table, the position he normally occupied in any meeting. He began to flip through the contracts, pretending to analyze the clauses he had already memorized. In reality, his senses were heightened, on alert for any suspicious movement, any hidden presence. "You two seem anxious," he commented casually. "Everything okay?" "Anxious? Me?" Michael laughed, but the sound was forced. "It's just the excitement of the moment, Robert. You know how it is. The deal of a lifetime." Robert nodded, turning another page of the contract. "And the crew? Where's Captain Stevens? I always like to say hello." "We gave the regular crew the day off," Paul answered too quickly. "We wanted privacy for this special moment. We hired a temporary crew just to handle the boat, in case we want to celebrate out on the water after we sign." Temporary crew. The words confirmed what Robert already knew. The armed men Isabella had overheard, hidden in the yacht's compartments. His stomach churned, but he kept his expression neutral. "I see. Very well thought out," he said. "And when are you planning to set sail?" "Right after the signing," Michael replied, filling the champagne glasses with trembling hands. "I was thinking we could head over to Fisher Island, spend the afternoon celebrating. What do you think? Fisher Island, far from the coast, far from witnesses." The plan was becoming clear. Robert felt bile rise in his throat, but he forced himself to maintain his composure. "Great idea, but before we sign, I'd like to clarify a few points. Don't you think we should have our lawyers present?" "Robert," Paul placed a hand on his shoulder in a way that was meant to seem friendly, but felt threatening. "We've been friends for 2 decades. Do you really need lawyers between us? Is that distrust?" "It's not distrust, it's prudence. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars," Robert replied, watching their reactions. Michael and Paul exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance, but Robert caught it. It was a look of concern, of plans that might be unraveling. Michael wiped the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Of course, but the lawyers have already reviewed everything. It's all perfect. We can sign now and do the official filings later. It's just a formality." "A formality that involves the transfer of controlling shares," Robert pressed, determined to force a reaction. "You'll understand my caution." That's when he heard the noise. A metallic sound from the hallway leading to the lower compartments. Someone had moved clumsily. The 3 men in the room tensed. Michael turned pale. Paul swallowed hard. "What was that?" Robert asked, feigning surprise. "Must be the new crew," Paul said quickly. "They're still getting familiar with the boat." Robert stood up slowly. "I think I'll go say hello. I always like to know who's at the helm of my vessel." "No!" Michael practically shouted, also standing up abruptly. "I mean, you don't need to. They're busy prepping the boat. Let's focus on what's important, the contracts." It was in that moment that Robert realized Michael had discreetly closed the conference room door. They were locked in. The trap was closing. Robert sat back down, but now his muscles were tense, ready to react to any sudden movement. The atmosphere in the room had changed completely. The charade of cordiality was dissolving like fog in the sun. Michael remained standing, the leather briefcase clutched to his chest, exactly as Isabella had described. Paul had positioned himself between Robert and the door, seemingly casual, but the intention was clear. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, or are we going to keep pretending we're friends?" Robert finally broke the silence, his voice calm but laden with disappointment and contained anger. Michael and Paul looked at each other again. This time, the look was one of surrender, of knowing the game was up. Michael was the first to speak, his voice tired, defeated. "How did you find out?" "Let's just say a little bird told me," Robert answered, deliberately keeping the information vague. "The important thing is I know 20 years, Michael. 20 years of partnership, and you planned this?" "You don't understand." Paul intervened, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes as if he could wipe away reality. "We're desperate, Robert. Completely desperate." "Desperate?" Robert repeated, incredulous. "You're multi-millionaires. What could possibly make you so desperate that we'd plan something terrible for you?" Michael finished, slumping into a chair. "Debts, Robert. Massive debts you can't even imagine." The yacht's engine rumbled to life. Someone had started the boat. Robert felt panic begin to rise, but he forced himself to stay calm. Carter and the team were listening to everything. He just needed to keep them talking, to get all the necessary confessions. "What kind of debts?" he asked, genuinely curious despite the dangerous situation. Paul put his glasses back on and faced Robert directly. "Remember when we expanded into the luxury real estate market in the Florida Keys 3 years ago? That high-end condo development that was supposed to bring incredible returns? I remember. You two handled that project separately, without my direct involvement," Robert confirmed. "It was a disaster," Michael confessed, his voice cracking. "Environmental issues, permits denied, lawsuits, we lost everything. But we couldn't let you know, we couldn't admit failure. So we started taking out heavy loans to cover the losses, thinking we could turn things around. And you couldn't," Robert concluded. "Worse than that," Paul continued. "The lenders weren't exactly people who accept late payments. They're dangerous individuals, Robert. The kind of people who don't send polite collectors with warning letters. They sent concrete threats against our families, our children." Robert felt a pang of something like compassion, but he quickly suppressed it. "And so you decided the solution was to eliminate me and take my share of the company?" "It wasn't our idea," Michael practically yelled, tears streaming down his face. "It was theirs, the lenders. They said either we found a way to pay or they would solve the problem their way. That's when they suggested that if you were no longer in the picture, the merger could still happen, but with your shares being redistributed between us, your surviving partners. The value would be enough to pay off all the debts and still have enough left over to start again." "Did you really think you could get away with this?" Robert asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You think no one would suspect?" "It would be an accident," Paul said, his voice cold, almost mechanical. "A tragic accident at sea. It happens more than you think, Robert. The sea doesn't always give back its bodies, doesn't always leave clear evidence." The door to the room swung open suddenly. 4 men entered, and Robert immediately recognized the leader from Isabella's description. A scar that cut across his left cheek from eye to chin, turning his face into a menacing mask. The snake tattoo on his right arm seemed to pulse as he gestured. They all had guns tucked into their waistbands. "Enough talk," the man with the scar said in a rough voice. "You two are too emotional. It's getting in the way of business." "Look, Vince, Robert already knows everything. The plan has failed," Michael tried to argue, his voice trembling. "The plan only fails if you give up now," Vince replied, approaching Robert. "And at this point, giving up isn't an option. You two are in this just as deep as I am, so let's finish what we started." Robert stood up, facing Vince despite the fear he felt. "You won't succeed. Do you really think I'd be stupid enough to get on this boat without taking precautions?" Vince smirked, revealing stained teeth. "Everyone's a fool when it comes to old friends. Trust is a weakness, Mr. Caldwell, but tell me, what precautions did you take? Leave a little note in your office safe. It'll be days before anyone reads it." "Better than that," Robert replied, pulling the phone from his pocket and showing the screen, which indicated an active call for over 30 minutes. My head of security and the FBI have heard every word of this conversation, including the full confessions from Michael and Paul and your direct threats." Vince's smirk vanished. Michael let out a whimper of despair. Paul simply collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The other 3 armed men looked at each other, clearly not expecting this. "You have 2 minutes to surrender," Robert continued, his voice firm despite his racing heart. "The marina is surrounded. There's nowhere to run. Hand over your weapons and you might still get out of this without adding more trouble to what you're already facing." Vince let out a harsh laugh. "You think I have anything to lose? I've been lost for a long time, Mr. Caldwell. If I'm going down, I'm not going down alone." That's when the sound of sirens cut through the air. The yacht was still moored, but they could already hear the roar of fast-approaching boats. Through the conference room windows, Robert saw bulletproof vests and pointed weapons. The FBI had completely surrounded the Majesty. "It's over, Vince," Robert said calmly. "Drop the guns and give yourselves up. There's no need to make this worse." For a tense moment, Vince seemed to consider resisting. His hand moved toward the gun at his waist. But one of his accomplices, younger and visibly terrified, had already raised his hands in surrender. Then another, and another. Vince looked around, realizing he was alone in his bravado. With a heavy sigh, he too raised his hands. "Your lucky day, Caldwell. But remember, luck doesn't last forever." Federal agents swarmed the yacht in seconds. Vince and his men were handcuffed and quickly removed. Michael and Paul remained seated, defeated, as cuffs were placed on their wrists while an agent read them their rights. Robert watched it all as if in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. "Mr. Caldwell, are you hurt?" an agent asked, approaching him. "I'm fine," Robert answered automatically, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Physically unharmed but emotionally devastated. Michael looked at Robert, tears now flowing freely. "Robert, I'm so sorry. So sorry. We never wanted it to come to this. We were cowards, weak. You didn't deserve this." Robert couldn't respond. "What do you say to someone who planned your murder, who saw your trust as a weakness to be exploited?" He simply turned his back as Michael and Paul were led off the yacht, their pleas for forgiveness echoing down the corridor. Carter came aboard, checking Robert from head to toe. "Sir, you were very lucky today." "It wasn't luck," Robert replied, thinking of Isabella. "It was an 8-year-old girl who had the courage to warn a stranger about a danger she overheard by chance." "The girl," Robert remembered suddenly. "Where's Izzy?" "In the car, safe. I can bring her if you'd like." "Please." Minutes later, Isabella was running down the pier toward Robert, who had disembarked from the yacht. She looked small and vulnerable amidst all the police activity, but her eyes shone with relief. "Are you okay? I saw everything from a distance. I thought something bad was going to happen." Robert knelt again to her, level, this time not out of condescension, but out of respect. "I'm okay, Izzy, thanks to you. You saved my life today, literally." "And now you're going to help me find my sister?" she asked, hopeful but cautious, as if afraid he would forget his promise. "Now I'm going to do a lot more than that," Robert said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "I'm going to keep my promise to find your sister, yes. But I'm also going to make sure that you two never have to worry about where you'll sleep, what you'll eat, or if someone will separate you again." That evening, Robert took Isabella to dinner at the best restaurant in South Beach. The girl, still in her patched clothes, sat uncomfortably in the elegant chair, looking around with a mixture of fascination and fear. The waiters glanced over discreetly, but Robert ignored them. In that moment, all that mattered was hearing the full story of this extraordinary child who had changed his life in a matter of hours. "Izzy, tell me everything. From the beginning," he asked gently, after the waiter brought her an orange juice and him a coffee. Isabella took a deep breath, her small fingers nervously playing with the cloth napkin. "My mum's name was Helen. She worked as a maid in a bunch of houses, but she could never keep a job for long because she kept getting sick. She had a heart problem that got worse and worse. The doctors said she needed surgery, but we didn't have money or health insurance." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. "Go on." "She tried to hide from me and Claire how sick she was. She pretended everything was fine, that she was just tired. But I could tell. When she thought we were asleep, I'd hear her crying from the pain. One day she just didn't wake up. The neighbors called an ambulance, but it was too late. Isabella paused, quickly wiping her eyes. I was 7. Claire was 4. And your father? We never knew him. My mom said he left when he found out she was pregnant the second time. He never came back. After my mom was gone, the social workers came. They said they were going to put us in a temporary home until they found a family to adopt us. But you were separated, Robert finished, feeling anger at the system that allowed that to happen. Not at first. We went to the same group home, but Claire is little, cute, always smiling even when she's sad. People liked her. After 2 months, a couple came who wanted to adopt a little kid. Just one. They said they couldn't afford to take care of 2, Isabella recounted, her voice trembling. I told the social workers that we couldn't be separated, that I would take care of her, that I wouldn't be any trouble. But they said Claire deserved a chance at a real family, that I was being selfish trying to hold her back. You weren't being selfish, Robert said firmly. You were a sister protecting your little sister. That's love, not selfishness. But it didn't matter, Isabella continued. They took Claire. She was crying, calling for me, reaching her little arms out for me. I tried to run after the car, but the staff held me back. It was the worst thing that ever happened in my life, even worse than losing my mom, because at least with my mom I knew she didn't want to leave me. But with Claire it felt like they ripped a piece of me away. And you ran away from the home to find her, Robert concluded. I stayed at the home for another month, but it was unbearable. They wouldn't tell me where Claire was, said it was for her own good, that I needed to accept it. How could I accept it? She's my sister, the only family I have left. So I waited for a night when the guard was distracted, and I ran. I've been living on the streets for almost 3 months, asking at shelters, at churches, anywhere. But nobody gives information to a kid. That's why you were at the pier, Robert understood, trying to survive and keep looking. Exactly. Last night I was so tired I fell asleep in that dark corner between the containers. That's when I heard the men talking. I wasn't paying attention at first, but when I heard them talking about doing something terrible to someone, I woke right up. I memorized every word, every detail. I thought if I had this information, maybe I could trade it for help finding my sister. I never imagined the man they were planning to hurt would walk right past me this morning. Dinner arrived, and Isabella ate with the delicacy of someone trying not to seem desperate, but it was obvious she was starving. Robert watched, realizing for the first time in his adult life how privileged he had been. All his complaints, all his worries about profits and contracts seemed trivial in the face of this little girl's daily fight for survival and for the love of her sister. Izzy, tomorrow morning I'm putting my entire legal team on this. We are going to find Claire, I promise, and when we do, I'm going to make sure you two are never separated again. But how, sir? Social services won't just give her back to me. I'm a kid, I can't take care of anyone, Isabella said, her voice filled with frustration and despair. Robert was silent for a moment, an idea forming in his mind. An absurd, impulsive idea, completely contrary to everything he had ever been. He, who had never wanted to marry, never wanted children, who had always preferred the controlled solitude of his corporate life. But something had changed that day, something fundamental in his perception of the world and his purpose. What if you and Claire didn't need a shelter? What if you had a permanent home with someone who can take care of both of you? He said carefully. Isabella looked at him confused. You know someone who wants to adopt 2 kids. I'm thinking of myself, Robert replied, surprising himself with his own words. Isabella nearly knocked over her juice glass. You? But you don't have a family, no wife, no kids. Social services would never even consider. I'm a successful businessman. I have unlimited resources, a huge mansion that's completely empty, and I just had an experience that showed me how meaningless my life was before you showed up, Robert explained, his conviction growing with every word. I can hire nannies, private tutors, therapists, whatever is necessary, and most importantly, I can guarantee that you two will never be separated again. But why? Isabella asked, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know me. You don't know my sister. Because you saved me today, Izzy, not just from the betrayal of my partners, but from an empty, purposeless life. I had everything, materially speaking, but I had nothing that truly mattered. No genuine connection, no real love, no reason to wake up in the morning other than to make more money I didn't even need. Robert paused, choosing his words carefully. When you stopped me on the pier today, when you insisted on warning me of the danger, even though I was rude to you, I saw a courage and a kindness I had forgotten existed in the world. And when you told me about your sister, about how you're willing to live on the streets just to keep looking for her, I understood what real love is. I want that in my life, Izzy. I want to learn how to truly love, and I think you two can teach me. Isabella was crying openly now, sobbing. But what if it doesn't work out? What if social services won't let you? What if you regret it later? I won't regret it, Robert promised, reaching across the table to hold her small, trembling hand. And I will fight for you two with the same determination I used to build my empire. The difference is, this time, I'm fighting for something that actually matters. They sat in silence for a few minutes each, absorbing the magnitude of what was being proposed. Robert knew he would face skepticism, bureaucracy, maybe even opposition from acquaintances who would think he was crazy. A 42-year-old workaholic bachelor wanting to adopt 2 girls. It was unusual, to say the least, but for the first time in decades, Robert felt he was doing something right. Something that wasn't about profit or status, but about purpose and humanity. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crumble, and instead of fear, he felt relief. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Robert mobilized his best lawyers to track down Claire through the foster care system. It wasn't easy. The bureaucracy was a labyrinth intentionally designed to protect children, but which, ironically, often harmed them. Records were incomplete, transfers between homes poorly documented, information contradictory. Isabella stayed in one of the guest rooms at Robert's mansion on Star Island. The house was enormous, with 8 bedrooms, a pool, and a garden overlooking the bay. For Isabella, who had spent the last few months sleeping in dark corners and on dangerous streets, it was like being in a fairy tale palace, but she could barely appreciate the luxury. She spent her days anxious, asking every hour if there was any news about Claire. Robert hired a private social worker, Dr. Frances Carter, a woman in her 50s with 3 decades of experience in the child welfare system. She was candid from the start. Mr. Caldwell, what you're trying to do is noble but extremely complicated. Single men rarely get approved for adoption, especially of 2 girls. The system is justifiably cautious, and the fact that you've built this entire relationship with Isabella in a matter of days might seem impulsive to the evaluators. I understand the concerns, but I have unlimited resources to provide the best possible environment for these children. I can undergo any evaluation necessary, Robert argued. It's not just about financial resources, Frances explained patiently. It's about emotional stability, the ability to form healthy attachments, available time. You work 16 hours a day building an empire. How do you plan to be a father? The question echoed in Robert's mind for hours after Frances left. How did he plan to be a father? He had 0 experience. He'd never changed a diaper, never read a bedtime story, never comforted a child after a nightmare. But when he looked at Isabella, when he saw the hope in her eyes every time the phone rang, he knew he would find a way. 5 days after the incident on the yacht, the legal team finally located Claire. She was in a shelter in Fort Lauderdale, just up the coast. Robert wasted no time. He took Isabella and Carter and drove there immediately. The Hope Shelter was a simple but well-kept building with colorful walls and a small playground in the yard. The director, Ms. Marcia, a sturdy woman with grey hair, received them with a cordial but visibly cautious demeanor. I understand you've located Isabella's sister, she said, looking at the girl with sympathy. But I need to be clear that we can't just release Claire. There are procedures, evaluations, and she's in the process of adapting with a temporary foster family. A temporary family? Isabella asked, alarmed. But she was already taken by a couple. What happened? Ms. Marcia sighed. Unfortunately, the adoption didn't go through. The couple decided they weren't prepared for the challenges of raising a child with separation trauma. Claire was exhibiting difficult behaviors, constant nightmares, refusal to eat. After 3 weeks, They returned her. Returned her, Robert repeated the words with disgust, as if she were a defective product. I understand your outrage, Mr. Caldwell, but this is the reality of the system. Not all adoption attempts are successful. The important thing is that Claire is now in a safe environment, receiving psychological support. I want to see her, Isabella said firmly. Please, just let me see my sister. Ms. Marcia looked at Robert, who nodded. The director sighed again. All right, but only for a few minutes, and I need to be present. They walked down the shelter's hallway to a playroom where several children were playing under the supervision of caregivers. In the corner, sitting alone in a small chair, was a little 5-year-old girl. Brown hair in messy braids, simple but clean clothes, huge, sad eyes fixed on a picture book she didn't seem to be really seeing. Claire, Isabella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The little girl looked up slowly, as if she couldn't trust what she was hearing. When she saw Isabella, the book fell from her hands. For a second, she seemed frozen, as if afraid it was just a dream. Then, with a cry of joy that made everyone in the shelter stop what they were doing, Claire ran toward her sister. Izzy, I knew you'd come find me, I knew it, she yelled as she ran, her little arms outstretched. The two met in the middle of the room, hugging with such force it seemed they wanted to merge into one person. They were both crying, laughing, talking at the same time. Robert felt a lump in his throat, an emotion he couldn't remember ever feeling before. Even Carter, the tough ex-military man, discreetly wiped his eyes. I looked for you every day, I never gave up, Isabella said between sobs. I was never going to give up on you, little sis. Did they hurt you? Are you okay? Are you eating? Claire checked her sister with her tiny hands, touching her face, her arms, as if needing to confirm she was real. I'm okay now, and I came to get you. This time for good, Isabella promised. Claire then noticed Robert standing a few feet away, her big eyes filled with fear. Who's that man? Is he nice? Is he going to take you away from me again? No, Isabella knelt to. Isabella. Be at her sister's level. This is Robert. He's the nicest man in the world. He's going to help us stay together, for good this time. Claire studied Robert with suspicion. He approached slowly, crouching down as well. Hi, Claire. Your sister has told me a lot about you. She said you like to draw and that you're very brave. The little girl didn't answer, just hid behind Isabella. She's going to need time, Ms. Marcia commented quietly to Robert. Being returned was very traumatic. She stopped trusting adults. Robert nodded, understanding. Then, speaking louder so Claire could hear, he said, I know you don't know me, and that you've been through a lot of bad things, but I want to make a promise to you and your sister. I'm going to work very, very hard so that you two can stay together, in a real home, where no one will ever separate you again. It might take time and it might be hard, but I'm not going to give up, just like your sister never gave up looking for you. Claire peeked out from behind Isabella. Forever. Forever, Robert confirmed, extending his pinky finger. Pinky promise? After a few seconds of hesitation, Claire extended her own tiny pinky and sealed the promise. The image of that simple gesture was etched into Robert's memory as a defining moment of his life. The following weeks were an emotional and bureaucratic roller coaster. Robert hired more psychologists, social workers, and lawyers specializing in child and family law. He went through countless evaluations, exhaustive interviews, and background checks. His life was dissected by social workers who wanted to ensure he was fit to be a father. Curiously, the incident on the yacht ended up working in his favor. The media had extensively covered the story of the businessman saved by a homeless child. Robert became a sort of impromptu hero, and his decision to help Isabella find her sister was seen as a noble act of gratitude. Public opinion was on his side, which pressured the system to give the adoption a chance. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Robert had to completely reorganize his life. He cut his workload in half, delegating responsibilities he had never entrusted to anyone. He transformed 2 rooms in the mansion into perfect spaces for little girls, with help from Isabella, who chose colors, furniture, and toys. Claire was still at the shelter but visited regularly, growing more and more comfortable in Robert's presence. 4 months after their first meeting on the pier, Robert received the news he had been anxiously awaiting. Temporary custody had been approved, The sisters could finally live under the same roof again, under his care, while the final adoption process moved forward. On the day he went to pick up Claire from the shelter to bring her home for good, the little girl carried a small backpack with all her belongings. She could barely contain her excitement. "Am I going to live with you and Izzy forever?" she asked for the 100th time. "Forever and a day," Robert replied, a phrase that would become a mantra in his new family. The adjustment wasn't perfect or instantaneous. Claire woke up every night screaming, terrified by nightmares of being taken away again. Robert learned to run to her room, turn on the light, and hold her little hands until she calmed down and went back to sleep. Isabella, for her part, had trouble trusting that this was permanent. She hoarded food under her bed and hid clothes in her backpack, always prepared to have to run away again. Robert hired the best child therapist in Florida, Dr. Beatrice Miller, who worked patiently with the girls, helping them process their traumas. The sessions were difficult, but necessary. Slowly, very slowly, the girls began to blossom. 6 months after they moved into the mansion, a moment occurred that Robert would cherish forever. It was a Friday night, and he had come home early from work to have dinner with the girls. Claire, now 6, was helping set the table, a task she took very seriously. Isabella was in the kitchen chattering excitedly about a school project. "Dad, can you pass the salt?" Claire asked naturally. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Claire froze, realizing what she had said. Isabella appeared from the kitchen, her eyes wide. Robert felt tears well up, but he held them back. He didn't want to scare the girls with the intensity of his emotion. "Of course, sweetie," he answered in a thick voice, passing the salt shaker with trembling hands. Claire looked at him, then at Isabella, then back at him. "Can I call you Dad? Even if the adoption papers aren't ready?" Robert knelt beside her, holding her small face in his hands. "You can call me whatever you want, Claire, but it would be the greatest honor of my life to be called Dad by you too." Isabella came closer, still cautious. "What if it goes wrong? What if the judge decides you can't keep us?" "It won't go wrong," Robert promised, opening his arms to hug them both. "But even if it did, even if the entire universe conspired against us, I would fight until my last breath to keep our family together. You two are my family now. My daughter and my daughter," he pointed to of them. "And family is forever." That night, the 3 of them slept together in the living room, covered with a large comforter, watching movies late into the night. It was the first night Claire slept without nightmares. It was the first night Isabella didn't check her escape backpack before bed, and it was the first night Robert felt he truly had a home, not just a house. The final adoption was granted 1 year and 2 months after the meeting on the pier. The judge, Frank Miller, a man in his 60s with decades of experience in adoption cases, gave an emotional speech during the final hearing. "In all my years working in family law, I have rarely seen a transformation as profound as the one I have witnessed in this case. Mr. Caldwell, you not only opened your home to these girls, but you opened your heart in a way that has fundamentally changed who you are. And girls," he looked at Isabella and Claire sitting beside Robert, "you not only found a home, but you also taught a man who had forgotten the true meaning of wealth. Therefore, it is with great joy that I grant the petition for adoption. Robert Caldwell, you are now legally and officially the father of Isabella Helen Caldwell and Claire Marie Caldwell." Tears flowed freely in the courtroom. Even the lawyers, normally professional and composed, discreetly wiped their eyes. Robert held his daughters, now officially his, and felt that his life finally had meaning. The years that followed were ones of growth and discovery for everyone. Isabella dedicated herself to her studies with fervor, always at the top of her class. She had a keen sense of justice and often spoke of wanting to help other children when she grew up. Claire discovered an extraordinary talent for art, spending hours drawing and painting, her works reflecting the journey of pain and healing she had lived through. Robert was completely transformed. The cold businessman focused only on profits became a present and loving father. He attended every school performance, helped with homework, organized elaborate birthday parties, and taught the girls to ride bikes along the Miami Beach boardwalk. His company remained profitable, but he had learned to delegate and prioritize. No meeting was more important than family dinner. 5 years after the adoption, Isabella, now 13, asked a question during dinner that took Robert by surprise. "Dad, do you ever regret changing your life for us?" Robert put down his fork, looking at his daughter with genuine surprise. "Regret? Izzy? Why would you ask that?" "It's just, sometimes I think about the life you had before you met me. You were free, you could work as much as you wanted, travel whenever you wanted. You didn't have to worry about report cards or sister fights or kid stuff," Isabella explained, looking down at her plate. "Look at me," Robert asked gently. When she raised her eyes, he continued, "Before I met you, too, I didn't have a life. I had an existence. I woke up, worked, came home to an empty house and slept. I repeated it all the next day. I had money, success, professional respect, but I didn't have love. I didn't have purpose. I had no reason to truly smile. You didn't change my life, Izzy. You gave me a life. And I would be eternally grateful if I had lost everything materially but gained you too, because you are worth more than any empire I could ever build." Claire, now 10, jumped out of her chair and hugged Robert. "I love you, Dad." "I love you both more than anything in this world," Robert replied, embracing both his daughters. The experience of fatherhood inspired Robert in other ways too. He began to question how many other children were lost in the system, separated from their siblings, waiting for families that would never come. 3 years after the adoption, he founded the United Siblings Foundation, a non-profit dedicated specifically to finding homes for sibling groups who, like Isabella and Claire, were often overlooked because families wanted to adopt only one child. The organization grew rapidly. Robert invested significant resources, but he also dedicated his personal time, giving talks, sharing his story, and raising awareness about the importance of not separating siblings. Isabella and Claire also participated, when appropriate for their ages, telling their own stories to inspire others to consider adoption. In 10 years, the United Siblings Foundation had helped unite more than 2,000 sibling groups with adoptive families. The organization expanded to other states, becoming a national benchmark for sibling adoption. Robert received awards and international recognition, but none of it mattered as much as seeing photos of reunited siblings, the genuine smiles of children who finally had a home. Isabella graduated from law school at 22, among the top of her class. In her graduation speech, she spoke about her personal journey and her commitment to working in child and family law, specifically to improve the foster care system so other children wouldn't go through what she had. Claire went on to study fine arts, specializing in art therapy. Her goal was to use art as a healing tool for traumatized children, helping them express emotions they couldn't verbalize. Her first exhibitions were a success, with powerful works that told stories of pain, loss, but also of hope and redemption. 20 years after the incident on the yacht, Robert, now 62 and with completely white hair, received the National Human Rights Award. The ceremony was held in Washington, D.C., with officials, activists, and important figures in attendance. But for Robert, the only people who mattered were in the front row, his daughters, now accomplished women of 28 and 25, respectively. Both were visibly pregnant, expecting their first children. Robert was going to be a grandfather. The thought still moved him deeply. He, who had once thought he would die alone in his empty mansion, was now surrounded by family and love. In his acceptance speech, Robert spoke with a choked voice. "This award is an immense honor, but I don't deserve it alone. It all started with a brave little girl who had the courage to warn a stranger of a danger. Isabella, you saved me that day on the pier, not just from physical harm, but from a meaningless life. And Claire, you taught me that love can heal even the deepest wounds. You too showed me that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, commitment, and unconditional love. Every child our foundation has, helped reunite with their siblings, every family we've formed, is a testament to the transformative power of the love you two taught me." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Robert saw his daughters crying, holding each other, and he stepped down from the stage to embrace them too. There, surrounded by the extraordinary women his daughters had become, Robert reflected on the impossible journey they had traveled together. If that day on the pier had ended differently, if he had ignored Isabella, if he had boarded the yacht unsuspecting, none of this would exist. There would be no family, no foundation, no thousands of reunited siblings. The betrayal of his former partners had, ironically, been the catalyst for the greatest good in his life. 25 years after the encounter that changed everything, Robert was sitting in the garden of his home, now an even larger estate in Palm Beach, where he had moved to have more space for his expanded family. 4 grandchildren played around him: Lucas and Beatrice, Isabella's children, and Michael and Sophia, Claire's children. "Grandpa, tell us the story of how you met Mommy again," 7-year-old Lucas asked, sitting at Robert's feet. "Yeah, Grandpa, we never get tired of that story," 5-year-old Beatrice agreed enthusiastically. Robert smiled, looking up at the blue summer afternoon sky. "Well, it all started on a very, very special day, many years ago, when a very brave little girl saved a lonely man from a terrible danger." As he told the story, simplifying some details for the children but keeping the essence of the truth, Isabella and Claire watched from the porch. Now mothers, wives, accomplished professionals, but always and forever sisters. "Do you think he really understands the impact he had?" Claire asked quietly. "I think so," Isabella replied. "But I don't think he understands that the impact was mutual. He saved us just as much as we saved him. It's true, we gave him purpose, but he gave us a future, hope, the chance to be more than our circumstances." The two fell silent for a moment, watching the patriarch of their family tell stories to his grandchildren with the same love and patience he had shown them decades ago. "You know what's most incredible?" Isabella said finally. "It's thinking that all this love, this whole family, the foundation and the thousands of kids reunited with their siblings, it was all born from that terrible moment of betrayal. If those men hadn't planned that, if I hadn't overheard them, none of this would exist." "It's what I always tell my patients in therapy," Claire agreed. "Sometimes the darkest things in our lives end up lighting the way to something extraordinary. Our pain was transformed into purpose." In the garden, Robert finished the story with the words he always used. "And so, the little heroine and her baby sister taught the lonely man that true wealth isn't in bank vaults or businesses, but in bedtime hugs, family dinners, and the I love yous said every day, and they lived happily ever after." "Forever and a day!" the 4 grandchildren shouted in unison, a phrase they had learned from their grandfather that had become the family motto. Robert looked toward the porch where his daughters stood and waved. They waved back. In that moment, surrounded by his loud, happy grandchildren, with his daughters watching, knowing he had built not just a family, but a legacy of love that would continue for generations, Robert Caldwell finally understood the true meaning of success. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Robert stayed, up a little longer, looking at the stars from his bedroom window. He thought of Michael and Paul, who had served their sentences and with whom he had never spoken again. He thought of Vince and his accomplices, whose fates he didn't know and didn't care to know. He thought of all the choices that had led him to this moment, and for the first time in decades, Robert was grateful for the betrayal, grateful for the terrible day that had become the blessing of his life, because without that darkness he would never have found the light. Without that danger, he would never have been saved. Without that brave little girl on the pier, he would never have discovered his purpose. Tomorrow, he would wake up early to make his grandchildren's favorite breakfast. Then, he would go to the Foundation's office for a meeting about expanding into 3 more states. In the afternoon, he had an appointment with Isabella to discuss a complicated legal case involving a family of 5 siblings who needed to stay together. And at night, family dinner as always. A simple life but infinitely rich. A life worth every second. A life that began with a warning from a brave child and transformed into a legacy of love. "Forever and a day," Robert whispered to the stars before finally allowing himself to sleep, with a peaceful smile on his face and his heart at peace. End of story. Hey everyone, we hope the story of Robert, Isabella and Claire touched your hearts deeply. This journey shows us that the darkest moments can turn into the brightest blessings of our lives, and that true love knows no limits or circumstances. If this story moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more narratives that celebrate the power of love, family, and redemption. Hit that like button if Robert, Isabella, and Claire have earned a special place in your heart. And in the comments, share with us, do you believe that small acts of courage can transform entire lives? Every day we bring you new stories that will move you, inspire you, and make you reflect on what truly matters in life. Don't miss our next video. Until the next story, and remember, family is a choice of the heart, forever and a day.